The wind drags itself through the empty halls of a forgotten abbey, a slow, persistent breath that tastes of iron and frost. It curls through the cracked stone, slipping between moss-covered arches and around pillars slick with centuries of rain, curling in upon itself like smoke reluctant to leave. Each gust carries a story, though no lips remain to tell it. Whispers of prayers that trembled with fear, of chants that strained under the weight of devotion, and of screams swallowed by shadows. The air is dense with memory, a thick, almost tangible presence that presses against the skin, cold and unyielding. Somewhere, alone, splintered door groans against its rusted hinges, the sound echoing like a weary sigh from a time long forgotten. Dust motes swirl in the waning light, caught in the slow dance of silence, each particle a fragment of centuries, drifting and trembling, barely visible but profoundly felt. Beneath a collapsed archway, half buried in rubble and shadow, a chest rests. Its leather straps are stiff and cracked, the iron clasps corroded to brittle hollows that yield only reluctantly. With care, the lid creaks open, a groan that resonates across the stone like the lament of the abbey itself. Inside are fragments of parchment, yellowed and delicate, scrawled in hands that shook with guilt, terror, and exhaustion. Each letter curves and trembles, a frozen sigh of humanity reaching across centuries. They tell of sins committed in secret, of moments when mercy was denied and desperation prevailed, of prayers whispered in trembling voices for absolution that never arrived. The words move as if alive, curling and twisting in the air, leaving a bitter taste of sorrow on the tongue, a reminder that even the faintest confession can endure long after the confessor has vanished. Among the relics in the chest lie objects that have absorbed the essence of human frailty. A rusted chain, blackened and stiff, still bears the shape of hands that once pressed against it in fear or defiance. A rosary, chipped and dulled by centuries of candle smoke, trembles beneath the weight of its own memory, as if the fingers that traced its beads long to feel them again. Each object vibrates with its own resonance, a quiet heartbeat of sorrow and endurance, carrying with it the shadows of those whose lives are governed by unyielding rules, the cruel caprices of fate, and the relentless march of disease. In the silence of the abbey, these objects speak louder than any voice, whispering of nights spent in dread, of devotion weighed down by exhaustion, and of souls who sought comfort and found only cold stone. The skeletal branches of ancient trees claw at the sky beyond the abbey walls, bent by centuries of wind and burdened with the ghosts of grief. Their shadows stretch across moss-covered stone floors like dark fingers, pressing against the remnants of devotion and despair alike. They sway with an invisible rhythm, the memory of lamentations carried in the rustle of their leaves, whispering through broken windows and collapsed arches. Above, a lone raven circles, its wings slicing through the gray light, a sentinel observing the interplay of ruin and remembrance. It carries with it the knowledge that even in silence, the echoes of atrocity are unrelenting, bleeding through the centuries and embedding themselves into the stones, the dust, the air. The abbey is alive with history, though no pulse beats beneath the cold floor. It is alive in memory, in sorrow, in the resonance of loss that refuses to be silenced. In the shadowed corners, the instruments of punishment and devotion rest in quiet menace. Wooden stocks, worn smooth by countless struggles, creak faintly as if recalling the strain of bodies pressed against them. Iron hooks, dulled by rust, hang in chains, shadows elongating beneath them like veins across the walls. Crucifixes, once gilded and bright, are now muted, their surfaces darkened by centuries of smoke and candle wax, each scar a testament to trembling hands and whispered pleas. Garments stiff with the residue of sweat and incense lie in rotting alcoves, their fabrics stiff with devotion and despair, carrying the scent of labor, fear, and ritual. Every relic, no matter how mundane, is suffused with the intimate history of those who lived and suffered here, bearing witness to devotion entwined with terror, belief intertwined with failure. The wind rises again, a howl that rattles the broken windows and lifts dust motes into a swirling dance of shadow and light. Parchments flutter in the air as if stirred by invisible fingers, their brittle edges trembling in the gust, revealing glimpses of confessions, of guilt, of desperate prayers. The ghosts of voices long silenced seem to murmur in response, chanting and wailing in a cadence that is at once human and elemental. It is not merely sound. It is the echo of emotion pressed into the stone, of fear and loyalty and despair captured in the very bones of the abbey. One can almost feel the tremor of those who once knelt here, the rigid shoulders of novices bent in fear, the sharp intake of breath before confession, the quiver of lips that uttered words of obedience or defiance. Through the nave, frost clings to cracked tiles, the cold biting the soles of imagined feet. Shadows pool beneath arches and around toppled statues, elongating and distorting as if the abbey itself remembers the shape of every soul who once passed this way. Footsteps that once rang with urgency or trepidation have been replaced by the soft echo of wind and the fluttering of bird wings. The walls, coated in centuries of soot and decay, seem to breathe, exhaling stories of devotion and despair in a rhythm imperceptible yet unavoidable. The abbey holds its history in its stone, in its air, in the subtle vibration of silence that hangs like a second skin, pressing on the senses and reminding the living that the past never truly vanishes. The human narratives embedded here are layered, each one more fragile and intricate than the last. A novice hiding from his own failings, trembling under the shadow of authority. A scribe weeping silently over a miswritten prayer. A keeper of keys whose hand shook under the burden of impossible obedience. Each life is encoded in these objects and spaces. Every chain, every rosary, every fragment of parchment carries a universe of suffering and endurance, an archive of intimate terror and devotion that refuses to be buried. History here is not abstract. It is tactile. It bites, it presses, it exhales against the living in ways that can be felt in the marrow, in the small shiver of a fingertip across rusted metal, in the faint tang of blood that lingers in the cold air. The day wanes, and light retreats into a gray, liquid silver that pools in niches and arches. The abbey is quiet, yet in its quietness, every object seems to stir, to whisper, to breathe. The tools of suffering, the instruments of faith, the relics of devotion. They move with the weight of history, each shift a reminder that human lives, though brief, leave echoes that endure. The cold stones hum with memory. The wind seems to pause, listening. Every shadow lengthens, pooling like ink across the floors, touching the remnants of hope, despair, devotion, and terror alike. Above, the raven cries once, a note sharp and clear, shattering the stillness and lingering in the air like an accusation, or perhaps a warning. The wind picks up, carrying the sound across the ruins, up the nave, into the corners where relics lie in patient testimony. The abbey exhales one last shiver of centuries, and the visitor cannot help but feel that the past, though silent, is ever present. It presses against the skin, presses into the soul, reminding that lives lived, sins committed, prayers whispered, all are not so easily abandoned. The raven disappears into the gray horizon, leaving only its cry, the drifting dust, and the solemn knowledge that the abbey will hold these truths long after the living have passed. As the sun sinks fully, shadows coalesce into darkness. yet the presence of memory lingers. Stone walls, mossed and cracked, seem to hum with the faint vibration of past suffering and fleeting triumphs. Every relic, every scrap of paper, every rusted chain is a thread connecting the present to the past, a testament to the fragility and persistence of the human spirit. The abbey waits, patient and unyielding, cradling the stories of lives lived and lost, devotion tested and broken, terror endured in silence. And in this quiet, the observer realizes the past is not gone. It whispers, it presses, it waits. The abbey does not forget. Even in this frozen ruin, under the watchful gaze of skeletal trees and circling ravens, there is the faint, almost imperceptible pulse of humanity, preserved in objects, in stone, in shadows. The air hums with remembrance, carrying with it the weight of devotion, the terror of punishment, the quiet endurance of those who came before. And as the night deepens, the abbey stands not merely as a monument of stone and moss, but as a living chronicle of the intimate horrors, quiet triumphs, and enduring spirits of a forgotten world, waiting for another soul to bear witness and listen. Through a narrow slit of light in the stone wall, a single beam trembles like a whispered memory, falling upon the chamber floor with the hesitancy of a hesitant soul. The air hangs heavy with the smell of iron, rust, and the persistent damp of mold that has claimed the breath of centuries. Shadows cling to the corners, pooling and shifting with a life of their own, draping the broken armor in a shroud of quiet accusation. A solitary figure bends over the mound of dented helmets, cracked shields, and splintered lances, each fragment humming with the echoes of battles long past. The metal, scarred and pitted, groans silently under touch, reluctant to release the secrets it has borne for generations. The figure's fingers hover over the symbols etched into the hilt of a rusted sword, each line carved with intention, each groove a testament to both skill and suffering. The weight of memory presses like lead upon the figure's chest. Every nick and dent tells of courage swallowed by darkness, of lives offered to ambition and ambition alone, lives buried beneath the grandeur of futile ambition. The walls themselves, pale beneath centuries of lime wash, are faintly stained with the ghostly red of blood long dried and forgotten. There's a cadence here, almost imperceptible, a heartbeat embedded in stone, resonating with the sorrow of those who perished in silence. From below, the wind finds its way through arrow slits and vents, rattling chains that once bound prisoners in the dungeon, making them tremble like skeletal fingers drumming upon the walls. Their echoes rise through the stone, brushing against the figure's skin, brushing against memory itself. The tattered tapestry hanging above is a muted specter of its former glory. It depicts a grand feast, abundant platters, golden chalices, laughter frozen in woven thread. Yet in its quiet decay, it mocks the suffering it pretends to conceal. Starvation, disease, and betrayal were the true inhabitants of the hall it portrays, though no brush nor thread acknowledge their presence. The figure steps closer, boots scraping the uneven flagstones, and notices a pair of gloves stitched with care, lying untouched as though awaiting the return of their owner. Centuries have passed, yet they remain, frozen in time, a tender monument to absence, longing, and the fragile insistence of memory against the inevitability of oblivion. Outside, the winter sun glints off frost-coated battlements, striking the tower in brittle light. It illuminates decay in stark relief, the corroded iron, the chipped stone, the warped wood. Even the grandeur of this fortress cannot resist the corrosion of time, nor can it absolve the human cost of its walls. The figure rises from the pile of relics, sensing the silent murmurs of the past that cling to every surface, the whispered prayers of soldiers, the quiet curses of prisoners, the soft weeping of widows who waited at the gates. Each artifact is more than metal and leather. Each is a vessel of memory, a heartbeat suspended in rust, a testament to lives lived, lost, and almost erased. A helmet, dented and scorched, is lifted. Its interior is lined not only with fabric, but with the ghostly imprint of the skull that once filled it. Sweat, fear, and blood have left invisible traces, pressed into its curve, speaking louder than any inscription. The figure runs a hand along its rim and can almost feel the tremor of the man who wore it, the anxiety that preceded battle, the fleeting courage before the final strike. Shields, similarly marred, are more than protection. They are silent witnesses, guardians of men who died clutching them to stave off both steel and despair. Lances, now brittle splinters, were once thrust forward with ambition, desperation, and raw hope. Each broken piece, lying amid the chaos of relics, hums with quiet lamentation. The figure's eyes linger on a sword with an intricately engraved hilt, the craftsmanship delicate yet purposeful. The blade, though rusted, reflects the narrow shaft of sunlight like a memory refracted through time. The hands hover above it, hesitant, as if carelessness might awaken something long dormant. In the silence, the past seems to fold around the figure, collapsing centuries into heartbeats. The air vibrates with the ghostly clang of steel, the shouts of men caught between valor and fear, the unheeded prayers of those who believe their cause just, yet were swallowed by the unforgiving machinery of history. The tower itself becomes a cathedral of memory, a mausoleum where courage, suffering, and fleeting triumph linger long after life has departed. The wind stirs the tattered tapestry again, making it whisper like dry leaves over an abandoned battlefield. Its threads tremble, as if carrying voices too faint for the living to hear. The banquet it depicts is now a phantom. Every chair is empty, every platter cold. Hunger gnawed at the bones of those who lived here. Disease crept silently along the corridors, and betrayal festered in whispered alliances, in letters delivered and intercepted, in trust broken before it was even earned. The tower bore witness to all of it, silently recording, storing, and never judging. Still it stands. Still it watches. The gloves catch the light again, and their stitching seems almost luminous against the cold, gray stone. They are more than mere leather. They are a symbol of touch, of presence, of the human desire to leave a trace, a memory, something tangible when all else falls to ruin. The figure lifts them reverently, imagining the owner, imagining a life of quiet diligence and small rituals, of moments unnoticed yet profound. For a fleeting heartbeat, the past and present merge. The clang of armor, the whispered prayers, the snap of a fire warming frozen limbs. The tower hums with resonance, a fragile, living echo of memory that refuses to vanish. The chamber itself seems to breathe as the figure moves further inside. Dust swirls with the currents of the winter wind, catching in the shafts of light, making the air shimmer like golden haze in a cathedral. Each fragment of armor, each weapon, each shard of wood or broken stone becomes a repository of emotion, a chronicle of the human soul pressed into forms that endure beyond flesh. The figure lingers at a shattered shield, noticing the faint insignia barely visible beneath rust and decay. It was a crest, once proud, now dimmed by centuries. And yet, in its decay, it speaks volumes of identity, of allegiance, of the fierce, fleeting pride of a life lived on the edge of mortality. The floor groans under the weight of footsteps, a reminder that even stone remembers. The figure approaches a cracked lance, leaning against the wall. Its tip, jagged and broken, once spearheaded a charge that decided fates and kingdoms. Fingers brush the splintered wood, feeling the tension of the strike, the momentum of desperation, the inevitability of fracture. In this chamber, the echoes of movement past mingle with the silence of present contemplation, creating a tapestry of experience more vivid than any painting, more haunting than any song. Outside, frost glitters in the waning sunlight, and the air is sharp with the bite of winter. The battlements are empty, yet one can imagine the banners snapping in the wind, the sentries pacing, the distant horns calling warnings across the hills. The figure steps toward the slit of light, peering across the horizon. The landscape stretches, gray and white, indifferent to the lives that once ran across it. And yet, within the tower, the metal and stone pulse with memory. Every dented helmet, every cracked shield, every splintered lance holds within it the courage, the sacrifice, and the fleeting glory of those long gone. The figure retreats into the chamber, placing the gloves carefully back among the relics. The light slants lower, shadows deepening, stretching across the floor like slow-moving spirits. A profound hush fills the room. The relics are no longer inert. They breathe with sorrow, with endurance, with the heavy weight of memory. Every scar in the metal, every tear in the tapestry, every crack in the stone wall speaks of the lives that passed through here, leaving whispers behind that refuse to die. The figure pauses, gazing one last time at the mound of metal and memory. A question hangs in the silence. What survives when all else is gone? Not the stone, not the iron, not the blood, but the resonance of lived experience, pressed into every scar, every fracture, every shadow. The tower exhales its centuries of grief, and for the first time, it seems almost alive, aware of the touch of a visitor who has come to witness, to remember, to feel. The winter sun continues to fall, brilliant and indifferent, illuminating ruin and beauty alike. The frost on the battlements sparkles like fractured glass, a fragile reminder that even in decay, there is a harsh and fleeting majesty. The figure steps back, letting the relics settle into silence once more. And as the light wanes, the chamber is filled with the memory of courage, sacrifice, betrayal, hunger, and hope, a living testament to lives that, though forgotten by history, endure in the quiet pulse of metal, stone, and shadow. In the stillness, one final thought lingers. Even in ruin, even in neglect, the human soul leaves its mark, pressing itself into the world in ways that refuse to fade. The gloves, the sword, the dented helmets, they are not merely remnants. They are echoes. They are voices. They are the heartbeats of those who came before, speaking still, if only one knows how to listen. And somewhere beyond the walls, beyond the frost and winter light, the story continues, waiting for those who remember to follow its whisper into the next chapter of life, death, and memory. The courtyard of a deserted village lies buried beneath a quilt of mist, each cobblestone slick with frost and dew. The silence presses down like a shroud, heavy and unyielding, broken only by the occasional shiver of wind threading through the skeletal trees that guard the remnants of homes. A wheel of a cart, splintered and overturned, rests beside a scattered heap of clay pots and rusted farm tools. Their shapes, once familiar instruments of labor and survival, now stand as mute witnesses to absence, their edges kissed by frost, their hollows collecting the slow drip of melting ice. The faint aroma of rotting straw and wet earth rises from the ground, mingling with the sharper, acrid tang of old iron, the scent of forgotten toil and suffering. Doors hang ajar, their hinges moaning faintly as if whispering the memory of someone's weight, someone's fear, someone's fleeting hope. Inside, darkness has taken permanent residence. The scratch of vermin on wooden walls punctuates the emptiness, a grim metronome marking the passing of days that no one survives to count. Windows, cracked and misted with frost, frame the courtyard in ghostly gray, casting long, trembling shadows that dance over the broken stone. Each shadow seems to carry with it a story. The hurried steps of a mother trying to soothe a child, the whispered prayers of an old man with arthritis stiff in his knees, the silent despair of a family who knew the approach of death before it struck. Against this desolate backdrop, a small shrine clings stubbornly to the corner of a crumbling house. Candles, long extinguished, are no more than blackened stubs, their wax curled like sleeping serpents. Icons stand chipped and worn, the faces of saints hollowed by the hands of those who sought comfort in their gaze, but found only the echo of their own fear. Here, in the corner of abandonment, one can almost hear the whispered chants that once filled the room with warmth, the prayers murmured under breath as villagers begged for rain, for harvest, for mercy from an unseen heaven. And now, the silence is complete, the devotion reduced to dust and splintered wood, testimony to faith tested by famine, plague, and marauders alike. A tattered cloak flutters against a broken fence, lifted briefly by a wind sharp with cold, before falling slack once more. Its movement is a fleeting ghost, a reminder that flesh and blood once occupied this place. The cloak bears the imprints of its wearer, the frayed edges where fingers clutched at hope, the faint traces of soot where fires were stoked in desperation, the smudges of mud from hurried flight. In it, one can almost trace the arc of a life. Hungry mornings, anxious nights, the endless toil that gave no promise of rest. And yet, the cloak moves as though reluctant to let go, a lingering spirit suspended in the frost. Footsteps press against the mud, tentative, hesitant, and each step disturbs the quiet. The ground, still damp from nightfall, exhales a wet sigh, releasing the memories of a life once lived. One can hear it if one listens closely. The laughter of children chasing one another across cobbles, the rhythmic strike of hammer upon forge, the low murmur of voices sharing bread and ale at the long wooden table. And then, the laughter fades, the hammer strikes cease, the voices die, the rhythm of life extinguished, leaving only shadows, echoes, and frost. Beyond the village, the mist stretches like a pale, restless sea, blurring the edges of trees and rooftops. In its heart, the faint chime of a bell, once tethered to the village church, resonates, a ghostly cadence that bends time. It is not a call to worship, nor a summons to celebration. It is a lament, a sound carried across years of neglect, a reminder of devotion that could not withstand hunger or disease. The chime fades and returns, soft as a sigh, scattering like ash into the fog, each ring a heartbeat of a place that once pulsed with life. The village is a study in decay, yet it speaks eloquently of human endeavor. Clay pots with cracked rims speak of meals prepared with care. Tools rusted and pitted testify to hands that worked in the early sun and the heavy dusk. Each object, each fragment, each shadow tells of struggle and persistence, of fear kept at bay for a season, of love sheltered in a fleeting glance. And the absence of life makes their presence all the more poignant. An overturned bucket is no longer a vessel, but a relic, a splintered wheel no longer a conduit of travel, but a monument to journeys that ended too soon. Here, in the courtyard, one can almost see the invisible tapestry of suffering and courage that threaded through this village. A mother's silent tears streak the frost on the windowsill. A boy's small hands press against the cold stone in search of a mother who cannot answer. An old man leans on a cane that has long since rotted away, his whispered prayers dissolved in the mist. Time has worn the village into an echo of itself. But the echo is articulate, precise, mournful, carrying the weight of every vanished life and every unfulfilled hope. The mist carries more than sound, it carries memory. A gust brushes through the skeletal trees, stirring dead leaves that scatter across the frozen earth, each flake of parchment or straw telling a story of feasts turned famine, of songs swallowed by grief. The wind threads through the hollows of abandoned walls, whistling across broken beams, whimpering like a child left alone in the night. And beneath it all, the ground exhales faintly, the decay of wood and earth mingling into a perfume of endings. Smoke from a long-dead hearth curls faintly from the chimneys, a phantom trace of warmth and sustenance. The hearths, once blazing with flame, now gape as blackened mouths into the night, the stones scarred by fire that was never quenched. One can almost see the villagers gathering around these fires, faces ruddy from the heat, hands extending to clasp one another in solidarity, the simple, human warmth of touch and breath. Yet even this memory is fragile, dissipating quickly into the cold, as if the world itself conspires to erase the evidence of life that once dared to claim it. Footpaths leading away from the courtyard wind into fields, long since untended. Stubble, the remnants of crops, rises in frozen tufts from the soil, brittle and gray. Among them, the bones of tools, hoes, sickles, rakes, lean against the frost in their eternal vigil. Here, the toil of hands is legible in the landscape, a record written in mud, straw, and iron. It is a testament to the relentless rhythm of labor, to the fragile endurance of humans attempting to bend nature to their will, and to the merciless reality that time and neglect will always reclaim what was once wrested from the earth. The trees, skeletal yet defiant, creak under the weight of ice, their branches trembling like the fingers of a mourner. Moss carpets the stones, delicate and green, a quiet insurgency of life against decay. Tiny shoots pierce the frost, small victories unnoticed, daring to exist where human memory has failed. Even in this silence, the village is alive in its own way, not with the bustle of markets or the clatter of tools, but with a slow, patient insistence of matter persisting, of history refusing complete erasure. Beyond the mist, the horizon is a blur, the sun a pale, waning presence behind the clouds. Shadows stretch and deepen, coiling around doors, fences, and broken walls. The air grows heavier, denser, as if the very fog has absorbed the weight of grief and despair that once saturated the village. A faint sound emerges, the scraping of a branch against stone, the flutter of bird wings disturbed by an unseen presence, the whisper of frost cracking under its own rigidity. Each sound resonates, magnified in the emptiness, a reminder that even in absence, there's a lingering pulse. And in the courtyard, life's traces cling stubbornly. A clay pot, chipped at the rim, cradles a puddle of frozen rainwater. A basket lies on its side, the faint imprint of grain still visible in its weave. An overturned stool rests against a wall, the ghost of its owner pressed into the stone. Every object is saturated with human intent, with the tiny acts that once defined existence here. Cooking, feeding, praying, repairing, tending. And now, each of these acts is frozen in time, monumental in its stillness, telling stories more eloquent than any written record ever could. Night falls fully, and the mist thickens, obscuring the courtyard and folding the skeletal village into itself. A lone owl calls in the distance, a sound of vigilance, of patience, of life persisting where all else has surrendered. The tattered cloak shifts again, caught by the wind, a spectral reminder of presence and absence intertwined. The bell tolls once more, faintly, hauntingly, a cadence that carries across frozen fields and shadowed stone, both an elegy and a summons. It resonates with the weight of memory, the persistence of grief, and the stubborn insistence of history. The courtyard waits beneath the mist, beneath the frost, beneath the absent sun. Every object, every shadow, every whisper of wind is a story suspended in time. And as one finally turns to leave, moving past broken fences and frost-laden stones, the village lingers in memory, a solemn testament to the fragile pulse of humanity, to toil and prayer and fear, and to the enduring echo of life that once dared to flourish here. It waits, patiently, for the next soul to step lightly across its frozen soil, to witness its sorrow, and to carry its story forward. Deep within the forest, where the oaks twist like ancient sentinels and their gnarled limbs claw at the dim sky, there lies a hollow carved in stone, a tomb forgotten by centuries. Moss clings stubbornly to the steps, softening the sound of fallen leaves, each one brittle and brittle, collapsing beneath a careful foot with a faint, ghostly crunch. The forest holds its breath here. Even the wind seems cautious, stirring only in small sighs, as if fearful of disturbing what rests beneath the cold stone. A candle, dwindled nearly to a stub, flickers on the damp wall, its flame trembling against the dark like a heartbeat. In the weak light, carvings emerge from shadow, saints with eyes wide in silent vigil, sinners twisted in eternal shame, angels and demons caught in a frozen struggle of flesh, spirit, and sin. Every stroke of the chisel speaks to devotion and fear, belief and desperation, a testament to lives suspended between heaven and earth. The air is heavy with the scent of centuries. It smells of earth, damp stone, mold, and the lingering perfume of incense, burned long ago in reverent or fearful hands. The smell carries memory, pulling the mind backward, into the time when these stones were new, when human hearts beat with hope, guilt, and terror. Skeletal hands clutch the remnants of lives once lived. Silver chalices dulled to a whisper of brilliance. Leather-bound psalters whose spines creak with age. Daggers tarnished, but still echoing the threat of betrayal. A small belt buckle, rusted and bent, hints at journeys ended abruptly, pilgrimages never completed. Each artifact is a voice from the past, a fragment of human striving, endurance, and surrender. They tell not just of death, but of the living, the striving, the trembling faith, and the quiet despair that preceded it. The silence is thick and pressing, yet it is not absolute. Drops of water fall from cracks high above, echoing through the stone chambers like a heartbeat, irregular, insistent, alive. Shadows gather and retreat with the flame, pooling in corners and shifting across carvings, as though the spirits themselves are restless, watching, waiting. They have seen devotion, sacrifice, betrayal, lust, and prayer. They have seen the weight of human expectation pressed into tiny objects of metal, wood, and cloth. Every surface hums with history. Every crevice vibrates with the echoes of those who once knelt here. One can imagine the prayers whispered in trembling voices, the hands pressed to stone or leather in desperate devotion. They came seeking protection from death, from disease, from the unknown. Others came seeking absolution, daring the gods to punish or forgive. Each artifact is a memory caught in time. The chalice gleams faintly with ambition and longing. The dagger hums with quiet menace, and the psalter bears the weight of sleepless nights, fingers tracing words of hope or desperation. The tomb is not merely a resting place. It is a library of souls, a repository of every choice made under fear, hunger, or fervent faith. The tomb walls seem to breathe with memory. Every carving, every scratch and crack speaks to the human condition, our desire for permanence in a fleeting world, our fear of the unseen, our longing to be remembered. Saints raise their frozen hands as if to guide the living, while sinners cower in stone, a reminder of the eternal balance of reward and punishment. The objects scattered across the floor are punctuation in the long, unending sentence of life. shards of pottery, fragments of cloth, pieces of jewelry once cherished. Even the smallest items carry resonance, a story of labor, love, fear, and failure, preserved in the slow alchemy of time. Outside, life continues unabated. A single bird perches atop the tomb entrance, its eyes catching the candlelight, reflecting centuries in an instant. It is both witness and mocker, reminding the living that time flows onward, relentless and impartial. Inside, shadows twist and converge, a silent ballet in the flickering flame, as though the dead themselves have taken shape in the dim light, observing the intruder. The candle flickers again, trembling, as if unsure of its own endurance. Dust drifts through the air, disturbed only by human movement, a fine snowfall of memory settling on stone and bone alike. One can feel the weight of the tomb pressing in, not just from the stones or the earth, but from the accumulated emotion of generations. Fear, hope, loyalty, betrayal. Each layer adds mass to the very air. The Psalter's cracked pages speak of nights spent kneeling, of prayers repeated until fingers ached, of devotion that did not spare even the body. The dagger, corroded but still suggestive of violence, whispers of betrayal and desperation, of sins committed in shadow and secrecy. The chalice, dulled by centuries, still gleams faintly with ambition and longing. The belt buckle hints at journeys cut short, lives interrupted by circumstance or divine whim. Every step taken here is an intrusion, a delicate negotiation with the past. Time is elastic, bending and stretching in the tomb's oppressive stillness. One hears not only the echoes of human life, but also the quiet persistence of nature reclaiming its domain. Moss on stone, dust in corners, the faint drip of water. The tomb is a liminal space, suspended between decay and memory, death and the persistence of life outside. Here, history is not abstract. It is tactile, it is smelled, it is touched. Each object holds energy, a residue of human existence, and the mind can almost feel the pulse of the lives that left it behind. As one moves deeper, the carvings sharpen in the dim candlelight. Saints with eyes like frozen flames, sinners crouched in eternal shame, angels and demons locked in a silent, eternal struggle. Every surface tells a story of endurance, devotion, fear, and sin. The shadows pull and twist. The air vibrates with the weight of unspoken prayers, and the objects scattered on the floor seem to hum in resonance with the heartbeat of the past. The chalice is no longer just a cup. It is a mirror reflecting desire and ambition. The dagger is no longer a weapon. It is memory, danger, and warning. The Psalter is no longer a book. It is a testament to human longing and desperation. The floor is littered with fragments, pottery, cloth, glass, metal, each carrying the invisible imprint of the hands that once held them. The dagger hums in silence, a warning of treachery, self-defense, or ritual. The chalice reflects not light, but longing, desire, and the eternal search for meaning. Even the smallest relics resonate with the lives that created them. They are reminders that life is fragile, fleeting, and perpetually at risk of erasure. Yet amidst the weight of death and memory, there is persistence. The bird outside, the sound of leaves and wind, the occasional drip of water. These are reminders that life continues, that the world outside the tomb moves on. And still, the tomb endures, a repository of human striving, fear, and devotion, a place where memory refuses to die. The candle's flame flutters one last time, casting long shadows that cling to walls and carvings alike. The air smells of earth and incense, of decay and devotion. Shadows tighten in corners, as if gathered for a final verdict. One can almost hear a whisper, soft and mournful, a call to remember, to bear witness, to recognize the cost of human ambition and faith. The tomb is not final. It is memory in motion, a bridge between what is remembered and what may be lost forever. Here, in the half-light between life and death, the weight of centuries presses down. One feels the enormity of human striving, the fragility of flesh, the persistence of memory. Fear, devotion, betrayal, hope, they are pressed into every crack, every shadow, every tarnished relic. And as one steps back into the forest, leaving the candle to gutter and the shadows to their eternal vigil, a question lingers, heavy as stone. What stories do we carry that time cannot touch? And what echoes will we leave behind for the dead to witness in silence? Even as the forest exhales around you, the tomb remains. Silent, immovable, a testament to devotion, horror, love, and loss. Shadows retreat only to return with the next flicker of light. Objects whisper their stories only to be silenced again by centuries. And in that silence, the mind feels the weight of human existence, the inevitability of mortality, and the stubborn endurance of memory. The bird takes flight, its wings slicing through the faint dawn mist, carrying with it the passage of time. Outside, the wind sighs through the trees, carrying leaves, dust, and faint echoes of prayers long forgotten. But inside, the tomb remains unchanged, eternal, a cathedral of decay and remembrance. One last glance at the carvings, the relics, the skeletal hands, and one realizes every object is a story, every shadow a witness, every breath in this space a testament to what it means to be human. And so the tomb waits. It waits for the next intruder, the next witness, the next heart that can feel the pulse of history in the damp, scented air. It waits for remembrance, for awe, for fear. It waits to remind us that we are but brief visitors in the eternal theater of memory, that our lives, like the candle's flame, are flickers against the dark, and that the past, in all its horror and devotion, waits patiently to be felt, if not understood. A pall of ash hung low over the town, thick and unyielding, pressing the fog into every crevice of the narrow streets. Chimneys stood like blackened fingers against the dim light of a sullen sky, their smoke curling lazily into the frozen air. But the smoke carried no warmth, no promise of hearths or kitchens alive with human voices. It carried the scent of burned herbs and charred wood, the faint bitterness of a life extinguished before its reckoning. Somewhere, a bell tolled, its hollow notes trembling across the empty squares, each chime a reminder that death had walked here, and that few had survived its passing to tell the tale. The toll lingered longer than it should have, each vibration scraping the bones, as if the town itself mourned with a voice too heavy for lips to form. The streets themselves seemed to mourn, slick with mud that clung to boots, to rags, to the remains of carts abandoned mid-journey. Shoes, some tattered, some polished once in pride, lay scattered like the bones of those who had worn them, as if life had emptied itself from this place and left only vestiges behind. Bowls, cracked and blackened by fire, rested beside overturned stools, carrying the ghost of meals never eaten, of mouths forever closed. Even the simplest of pottery told of abrupt departures, of hunger and fever tearing families apart in silent hours. Each fragment, each shard, whispered the story of a life abruptly halted, its narrative incomplete, unfinished, yet undeniably human. The wind stirred these fragments, rolling straw and papers across the cobblestones, as if even the elements themselves could not leave the dead unremembered. The timber-framed houses leaned in upon one another, as if seeking solace in shared suffering. Their walls sagged with rot, blackened with the smoke of fires that no longer burned. Windows, once bright with candlelight and the soft gleam of domesticity, were dark, opaque with soot and neglect. Doors hung ajar or lay splintered, hinges twisted, as if the town itself had exhaled in despair. Inside, floors were littered with the remnants of domestic life. Tattered clothing, a needle fallen mid-stitch, a writing quill stiffened in ink that would never finish its letter. Shelves sagged under the weight of forgotten books and clay pots, their surfaces etched with a thin layer of dust that had settled over a life abruptly interrupted. Each object bore witness. Each object waited, holding the echo of a presence now vanished. The silence was thick, yet not empty. If one listened closely, the walls seemed to hum with the memory of voices, their resonance faint, like a song half-remembered. In the heart of the marketplace, the world paused in a cruel stillness. A cradle lay overturned, straw spilling across cobblestones, its small shape a silent scream for the child it once cradled. Nearby, a merchant's scale remained frozen, suspended mid-measure, as though death had demanded that even mundane commerce halt in reverence. Ledger books, once neatly bound, now lay blackened and curled by smoke, their quills stiff with abandoned accounting. Debts went unpaid, promises were broken, orders remained unfulfilled. And yet, in these fragments of trade and survival, one could glimpse a persistence, a human stubbornness that even death could not wholly erase. Every object hummed with memory, and memory, in its own way, was a form of defiance. The marketplace, though deserted, was saturated with echoes of bargaining voices, shouts, laughter, and the fleeting cries of infants. It was a chamber of lost lives, yet every item bore the quiet insistence that life had once been here, that it had mattered, that it had fought. The air itself was dense with absence. Absence of voices that had once called across the streets in warning, in gossip, in laughter. Absence of the clatter of boots, of children's feet racing through alleys, of merchants hawking their wares. Grief was present, yet unseen, lingering in the hollow spaces between walls, in the crooked shadows of doorways, in the fog that clung to the town's bones. And still, the town seemed to breathe, a slow, shivering inhalation of cold and ash, as though it remembered its former life, as though it mourned alongside the souls who had been torn from it. Each echo of wind through empty streets became a whisper, a question. Who had lived here? Who had suffered here? And who, if any, would survive to recall it? Above, the sky moved in its own sorrowful rhythm. Birds, black silhouettes against the gray, circled above rooftops. Their wings sliced the air, carrying with each stroke a whisper of the somber truth. Flesh and breath are fleeting, but memory lingers, trapped in wood, in stone, in the very objects that bore witness. The birds cried into the fog, their cries mingling with the distant tolling of the bell, a mournful chorus to the fragile persistence of what had once been. Even as the living departed, the town remained a ledger of experience, its stones and timbers recording the minutiae of lives consumed by circumstances beyond comprehension. In their circling, the birds traced invisible lines between doors, between broken pottery, between overturned carts, mapping the remnants of a vanished humanity. In the shadows of alleyways, one could glimpse traces of hurried departures. A door left swinging, a basket overturned, a scarf snagged on a nail, each telling a fragment of a story. A family torn apart by fever, a traveler seized by hunger, a woman left to whisper prayers alone in a darkened chamber. The town was a canvas of human struggle, painted in the muted tones of grief, soot, and ash. And yet, in the very stillness, there was evidence of endurance. A chair upright against a wall, a knife laid beside a pot, a fragment of bread hardened but untouched, remnants of ritual, of order, of hope that clung stubbornly to life even in the face of overwhelming despair. It was as if, in these small gestures, the living had left instructions for those who might follow. Remember, endure, bear witness. The marketplace, though desolate, remained a theater of vanished humanity. The stones beneath, worn smooth by centuries of footsteps, now carried the weight of silence. Shadows pooled in the corners where traders had once exchanged words and coin. A stray coin glinted faintly, kissed by the low light of the fog, a solitary testament to a life of commerce interrupted. Fragments of cloth, caught in the crooked lines of the market stalls, fluttered like spirits seeking the air. And in the hush, there was an almost audible heartbeat of history, the echoes of negotiation, laughter, barter, and betrayal, all suspended, waiting for ears that would never hear them again. Each cobblestone, each crack in the wall, was a memorial, a subtle diary of ordinary life interrupted, a reminder that even in small gestures and transactions, human stories leave indelible marks. Through the skeletal remains of streets, the wind moved like a living thing, stirring loose straw, rattling shuttered windows, carrying the faint scent of herbs burned to stave off illness, of smoke, and of rain-slicked mud. It wound through the ruins, whispering stories of suffering, courage, and the stubborn insistence of life in the face of certain death. Even the fog seemed to cling more thickly to places where sorrow had been deepest, where a child had cried alone, where a merchant had counted coins in vain. The town had become a tomb, but also a repository of memory. Each building, each object, each crooked alleyway a page in a book of human experience written in ash and shadow. The mud, the cobblestones, the fractured timbers, they were not empty. They carried the history of every fleeting heartbeat, every desperate plea, every act of care and defiance. A distant bell rang once more, its tone hollow and lingering, echoing through the skeletal streets. And in its sound, there was a quiet recognition of loss, but also of endurance. The objects, the cradle, the scale, the ledgers, the scattered shoes, continued to bear witness. They whispered of lives lived, of love given and lost, of fears faced and unspoken. They held in their silence the essence of humanity's persistence, the subtle, relentless truth that even when flesh decays, memory, and the artifacts it leaves behind, endure. The town itself had become a monument to those who had vanished, a place where the echoes of hope, fear, and resilience lingered like a fragrance in the air. As the fog thickened once more, swallowing the crooked streets and the sagging houses, a sense of quiet resignation settled over the town. It was a town that had lived, that had loved, that had fought against an unrelenting darkness. Its people were gone, but their existence was carved into the very fabric of the place. The wind moved again through the empty streets, brushing the tops of rooftops, stirring the last embers of smoke, carrying away the echoes of grief while leaving the objects, the traces, the whispers behind. In this silence, there was a story waiting to be told, a story of what was lost, what endured, and what might one day be reclaimed. The town, though ravaged, still spoke. And for those who would come after, it would have a voice that could not be silenced. Even in decay, the town bore witness to the tenacity of human spirit. The faint scratch of a quill in a ledger, the stiffened lines of a child's garment, the way mud clung to the soles of abandoned shoes. These were markers, testaments, relics of resilience. Here, in the fog-choked streets, amidst the ash and soot, hope lingered stubbornly, hidden in gestures, in objects, in memory. And for those who dared to walk these streets in the silence of night, there was a lesson that death could not erase. To live is to leave traces, and traces, like echoes, endure far beyond the span of flesh and breath. A chill hangs heavy in the air, clinging to stone and bone alike, as if the cellar itself exhales in quiet warning. The walls are slick with centuries of damp, their surfaces mottled with streaks of gray and green, telling of time's slow, unyielding march. The smell is thick and pungent. Sour wine fermenting into sharp vinegar, moldy grain, the faint tang of iron rust, and a musty undertone that suggests the passage of countless lives. Barrels, swollen and split along their seams, leak their putrid contents, releasing the ghosts of meals long gone, the fleeting remnants of feasts that once nourished soldiers and servants alike. A sudden scuttle echoes across the stone floor. Rats dart in and out of gaps behind timber supports, their claws scratching against centuries of dust and grit. Their black eyes gleam in the faint light, reflecting a vigilance born of survival, a world within this underground world. They vanish as quickly as they appear, leaving behind only the impression of movement and life in a place where hope seems to have long abandoned its post. The cellar, in turn, inhales again, drawing in the muted sound of existence and pressing it into its cold, unyielding walls. Among the decay lie the tools of war and survival. Rusted arrows lean against the crumbling stone, their shafts warped and splintered, feathers frayed and barely clinging. Tattered banners, once brilliant with colors that proclaimed allegiance and pride, now hang in tatters, their threads unraveling in silent surrender to time. A helmet, half swallowed by shadows, rests atop a pile of detritus. Its dents and pocks speak of blows received, of battles fought with grit and fear, victories earned only to be forgotten. These objects are mute witnesses, yet they whisper, each in its own way, of the humans who grasped them, who held them close in moments of dread and hope alike. At the center of the room, a ledger lies open, pages swollen and ink blurred, yet still whispering with authority. It records rations given in paltry measures, fines imposed for offenses trivial or grave, punishments meted out with relentless impartiality. Its handwriting, careful and deliberate, is the voice of order pressed into ink, a meticulous account of life in these stone confines, where obedience was both survival and chains, and where small rebellions could vanish without trace. One can almost hear the quiet scratching of quill against parchment, the faint rustle of paper, the nervous breath of the clerk recording every transgression, every moment of human frailty. A faint flicker of candlelight illuminates a set of iron shackles lying nearby. Cold and heavy, they speak of captivity, of the slow erosion of freedom and dignity. Once, they clasped the wrists and ankles of men and women who trembled under the weight of punishment. The iron is etched with rust, yet its presence is still enough to chill the soul. Shadows stretch from the links, crawling along the stone, mimicking the movements of those who once struggled, who once hoped for mercy. The shackles are more than metal. They are memory, witness to despair, endurance, and the quiet terror of those pressed into servitude and sin. A small, barred window high above lets in a slender shaft of gray light. It is a weak sentinel, indifferent yet persistent, tracing the contours of stone, dust, and debris. Tiny motes float lazily in the beam, catching fragments of history, revealing the texture of centuries pressed into mortar and stone. The light falls across the floor in muted rectangles, exposing footprints of those who once walked these passages, traces of hands that clutched at hope or at fear, and faint imprints of life pressing into stone. Even the air seems to tremble here, carrying the faintest echoes of the voices and footsteps of long-gone custodians, prisoners, and guards. The cellar itself breathes in subtle rhythms. Footsteps from above reverberate, muted by layers of stone and earth, yet their vibrations reach even this hidden world. Seconds stretch to hours, hours stretch to years. Hunger is measured not in minutes, but in gnawing persistence, a quiet reminder that life below is calibrated differently from life above. The ledger's meticulous records of rationing, punishment, and fine are echoed in every silent corner of this underworld. Each shadow, each stone, each object is a story pressed into the earth, a testament to human endurance and to the cold impartiality of survival. In corners untouched by candlelight, mold carpets the stone in shifting shades of green and black, spreading like a living map over the centuries. The scent rises thick and pungent, penetrating lungs and memory alike, a reminder that decay is as much a part of life as growth. The walls seem to weep slowly, the mortar stained by water that has seeped and trickled through the stone for decades. And yet, despite the weight of time and neglect, the cellar resists collapse. It endures, holding fast the stories of the lives pressed against its walls, of hands that labored, prayed, and survived. Each groove, each dent, each scratch in the wood or iron is a testament to tenacity, small victories pressed in a cold, unmoving stone. Among these relics, the mind begins to imagine the whispers of the past. Perhaps a guard once muttered a curse under his breath as he trudged past the barrels, exhausted, hungry, and fearful. Perhaps a prisoner lay in the darkness, listening to the scratching of rats, counting the passing minutes as days, days as weeks. Perhaps a child, hidden in shadow, traced the edges of a tattered banner, trying to read meaning from thread and color that had long since faded. Each object carries not just its own history, but the weight of the lives that interacted with it, layered memories pressing upon memory in a dense tapestry of human existence. Occasionally, the silence is broken. A distant clatter, a rat topples a fragment of broken pottery, the sound magnified in the enclosed chamber. The floor seems to shift beneath one's feet, groaning with centuries of weight. Shadows lengthen and recoil with flickering candlelight, folding corners into darkness, as if the walls themselves are breathing, responding to the presence of a witness. The cellar has its heartbeat, subtle yet persistent, and it beats in rhythm with fear, endurance, and quiet observation. Here, the rules of existence are elemental. Hunger gnaws, as predictable as the turning of seasons, and fear is as immediate as the cold stone beneath a shivering body. Vigilance is instinct, every sound and movement carrying immense significance. The ledger's ink cannot capture these nuances. It cannot measure the tremor of a hand clutching a torch, the quiet prayers muttered in darkness, or the silent hope that survival might yet be possible. Yet all of this is inscribed into the cellar itself, pressed into stone and iron, dust and shadow, an unspoken archive of suffering and resilience. Even the smallest objects resonate with life. A corroded sword leans in patient silence, hilt worn smooth by hands that gripped it in desperation. A bucket, cracked and brittle, retains faint traces of whatever it last held, scented with the memory of human sustenance. A fragment of parchment, ink faded nearly to nothing, hints at messages that were never delivered, warnings never heard. The cellar transforms these ordinary items into storytellers, each carrying the weight of choice, survival, and loss. They become, in their mute testimony, the narrators of endurance and suffering that no written ledger could fully capture. A faint wind threads its way through the barred window, stirring dust and lifting the corner of a banner. In that subtle movement, one can almost hear the echoes of voices, distant horns, the clang of armor, and the quiet prayers of the forgotten. Shadows shift with the breath of air, as if the cellar itself is alive, attentive, remembering. Life continues above, indifferent and relentless. Yet in this subterranean world, the echoes of human experience persist, preserved in layers of grime, rust, and stone. Every corner holds duality, deprivation and endurance, cruelty and loyalty, despair and hope. The cellar is witness to both the ordinary and the extraordinary. A rat becomes a sentinel, a shadow, a storyteller, a ledger, a confessor. Each moment of silence vibrates with the energy of centuries, a pulse that reaches those who take the time to listen. Even as the past recedes, its presence lingers in subtle ways. In the faint scent of mildew, in the flicker of candlelight, in the heavy iron of the shackles and the cold, implacable weight of stone. As one begins to leave, retracing steps along the uneven floor, the cellar exhales one final time. The rat vanishes into its hidden tunnel, the candle guttering, the gray light retreating from stone. Yet the story remains, folded into every crack, every shadow, every object. Iron is cold, wood is warped, dust is thick, but memory endures. The cellar holds the imprint of lives lived, the quiet record of suffering and resilience, the haunting poetry of existence pressed into stone and shadow. It is a world carved from sweat, fear, and endurance, a mirror of the fortresses above, where power is exercised in silence and survival is measured in grit. Life has moved on, indifferent, yet the cellar remains, a repository of echoes, a cathedral of quiet despair and tenacity. Here, in darkness and damp, the human story lingers, a testament to suffering, endurance, and the fragile, unyielding pulse of life pressed against the cold stone. Even as one ascends into the light of the world above, the cellar follows, an invisible shadow in memory. The iron shackles, the tattered banners, the corroded sword, they linger, reminding all who see them that life once thrived here, constrained yet unbroken. The cellar is both grave and archive, silence and witness, despair and quiet triumph. A repository of all the human hands, hearts, and minds endured when the world above demanded obedience and life below exacted its toll. Here, amid rot and shadow, the past breathes, the present trembles, and the future remains forever aware of the endurance etched into every stone. The cellar does not speak, it waits. It watches, it remembers, and in that remembrance, it keeps alive the quiet poetry of human existence, pressing its stories into anyone willing to feel the weight of history, even for a fleeting heartbeat. By the edge of a desolate river, the remnants of a bridge lay submerged, warped timbers jutting from the water like the fingers of a drowned giant, frozen in a silent plea for remembrance. Mist rose in pale ribbons from the surface, curling around the reeds, the knotted roots, and the jagged stones that had long since lost their purpose. The air was thick with the smell of wet earth, decaying leaves, and the faint, acrid tang of rust. Each breath carried with it the memory of water's relentless passage, a slow, patient erasure of the lives it had touched, swept away, and ultimately preserved only in fragments. The river, placid and indifferent, was both grave and witness, a custodian of forgotten stories and unspoken grief. Coins blackened and dulled by time littered the banks, half buried in silt and mud, their faces eroded yet still recognizable, like shadows of kings and saints peering from the past. They whispered of commerce, of bargaining, of sudden thefts, of hands reaching in desperation or hope. Some were offerings tossed into the river as supplications to gods unknown, while others were hurried bribes, small payments in fleeting moments of fear. Each coin carried the faint echo of human desire, greed, devotion, curiosity, and the quiet, trembling hope of survival. They were tiny, silent witnesses to lives lived in haste or devotion, surviving long after the hands that held them had crumbled to dust. A half-burned book, soaked through and swollen, rested among the reeds at the water's edge. Its pages curled and clung to one another, ink bleeding into waterlogged shapes, forming patterns that seemed almost alive. In the faint traces of script, one could hear the quivering voice of its writer. Perhaps a monk fleeing the fire, a child scribbling prayers in secret, a woman documenting loss and longing by candlelight. The words were fragile, yet enduring, caught between destruction and preservation. Even in decay, the book spoke insistently that memory, thought, grief, and devotion leave traces, that they may survive the annihilation of flesh and fire. The river, in cradling it, had become both protector and censor, revealing fragments while swallowing the rest. Scattered along the banks were shards of pottery, rusted tools, and fragments of everyday life emerging from the silt. A cracked jug, its lip worn smooth by years of repeated use, whispered of kitchens alive with the smell of bread and broth, of hands shaping sustenance with care and ritual. A spade, its iron corroded, spoke of labor and endurance, of the relentless human urge to shape the earth, to carve life from unyielding soil. Even ordinary objects, once unnoticed in their daily function, stood now as monuments to those who had walked this land, marking absence as vividly as presence. Each shard, each rusted blade, was testimony to survival, to failure, and to the delicate balance between human effort and nature's indifference. The insects were tireless, buzzing over stagnant pools with a tiny, inexorable insistence. Their persistence seemed cruel in contrast to the fragile remnants of human life around them. Yet it was a quiet lesson in resilience. Life presses forward even when hope falters. Their wings hummed in a fragile symphony, accompanied by the occasional splash of fish stirring beneath the surface. A heron rose suddenly, wings slicing through the morning haze, casting a fleeting shadow across the ruins. Its movement was precise, serene, and terrifying in its grace, a reminder of the fleetingness of life against the permanence of decay. It carried with it the weight of centuries, a silent witness gliding above the remnants of human endeavor, casting reflections that rippled and fractured like the memories held in the river. The river itself was alive with memory. Its waters held the echoes of floods that had torn fields from their moorings, of fires that had devoured villages in the dead of night, of famine and plague that had reduced streets to silence. Yet within this same water lay traces of courage, the small victories of planting, of rebuilding, of defying nature and time. Every submerged timber, every rusted nail, every half-burned page was a line in the ledger of memory, cataloging both suffering and defiance. As the mist drifted higher, obscuring the opposite bank, it seemed almost as if the river were listening, waiting for the voices of the past to speak once more. The morning air carried the scents of wet stone, river weed, and the faint smoke of abandoned hearths. Fog clung to the reeds and ruined bridge, softening the jagged edges of decay, turning devastation into a kind of melancholy poetry. In this hush, every small noise, a splash, a bird's call, the rustle of reeds, felt magnified, a heartbeat against the silence. Time itself seemed suspended, stretched and folded in the mist, allowing a single moment to contain centuries. Every element, the water, the wood, the mud, the insect, the heron, was imbued with tension, the delicate balance between survival and loss. Among the remnants, a small wooden toy, blackened and waterlogged, emerged from the mud. Its painted surface was gone, but its shape remained, a tiny sentinel of childhood, laughter long silenced. Nearby, the skeleton of a cartwheel jutted from the silt, spokes bent like the fingers of the dead, a reminder that transport, trade, and connection had been fragile things, dependent on hands that no longer existed. Even the riverbank itself seemed to mourn, furrowed and uneven from centuries of shifting waters, a landscape carved by human toil and natural caprice alike. Here, the horror of the past was not found only in violence or misfortune, but in the silent persistence of objects, carrying stories of those who had vanished into the currents of time. The river's surface was dappled with sunlight as it rose, shimmering across the blackened coins and waterlogged pages. Light fractured into 1,000 glints, as if the past itself were trying to shine through the sediment. These glimmers carried the weight of unspoken histories, whispered prayers, frantic negotiations, private griefs, stolen moments of love, fleeting triumphs snatched from despair. Every reflection on the water became a fragment of a larger narrative, a reminder that human existence is fragile, ephemeral, yet insistent in its echoes. And yet life persisted. Frogs croaked from hidden pools, insects danced on the water's edge, and the heron's shadow moved beyond the mist. The wind stirred the reeds and carried with it the smell of moss, of damp stone, of water-slicked wood. In these tiny, persistent signs, one could perceive a rhythm, a quiet insistence that life continues, that memory survives even when the living are gone. Even amidst decay, there was resilience, beauty, and an unspoken continuity that spanned centuries. In the midst of ruin, the reader of history would find both terror and intimacy. Each artifact, each waterlogged page, each rusted implement preserved a private truth. A mother's prayer for her child, a farmer's plea for rain, a merchant's quiet hope for profit, all were embedded in the objects left behind. They reminded us that history is not only found in epic battles or the decrees of kings, but in the minutiae of survival, in the traces of ordinary lives pressed against the relentless currents of chance and time. The river, indifferent to human memory, yet full of it, wound onward. Its waters reflected the sky, the mist, and the ghostly outline of the broken bridge, preserving the fragments of human existence like a mirror that could never forget. Beneath the surface, shadows of the past moved. The laughter of children running along vanished streets, the cries of villagers fleeing fire, the whispered prayers of those who lingered in fear of unknown fates. These echoes, though silent, formed a tapestry of remembrance, a river of stories flowing beyond the limits of individual memory. As sunlight broke through the morning fog, the heron disappeared beyond the bend. The river, smooth again, carried the reflections of timbers, coins, and reeds in a trembling mosaic. A blackened coin caught the light, glinting faintly, and the water rippled as if acknowledging the presence of the living. The silence that followed was heavy, pregnant with memory, grief, and the weight of absence. It reminded the observer that even in desolation, the world endures, and that even when human hands fail, the river continues, cradling history, grief, and hope alike. The ruins told a story of endurance and impermanence. A single wooden beam, half submerged, bore the marks of fire and water, each scar a testament to survival and destruction intertwined. Nearby, reeds bent under the weight of morning dew, the gentle sway of their green blades a quiet rhythm against the hard lines of decay. The riverbank, littered with fragments of human endeavor, became a stage for reflection, a space where time and memory could merge, where one could hear the pulse of centuries in the sighing of wind, the lapping of water, the glint of metal and bone. Even the smallest details carried weight. A rusted knife, barely recognizable, hinted at protection, violence, or necessity. A fragment of cloth, blackened and rotting, whispered of warmth, comfort, and the human body pressing against the cold. Every object, no matter how insignificant, became a repository of narrative, a testament to lives lived fully, however briefly, along the margins of history. In this place, the horror of the past was not only in blood or fire, but in the quiet persistence of matter, preserving traces of those who had vanished into the folds of time. And as the river wound further, carrying the remnants of lives, commerce, and prayer, one was left with a haunting clarity that the past endures not only in chronicles or monuments, but in the quiet testimony of objects, in the ripple of water across a blackened coin, in the swelling of a ruined page, in the shadow of a bird against the mist. These fragments demanded remembrance, reflection, and awe, offering a meditation on mortality, resilience, and the silent persistence of memory. The river, patient and eternal, flowed onward, bearing with its stories of hope and despair, triumph and suffering, life and death. In its surface, the glints of blackened coins, the curves of waterlogged pages, and the jagged edges of submerged timber shone faintly, catching the eye and the mind. Every ripple, every insect, every stirring of reeds became part of a vast, unspoken narrative. The human life is fragile, that loss is profound, yet that memory, however quiet, however fragmented, endures. Here, at the edge of this river, among drowned timbers, blackened coins, and waterlogged pages, the observer finds a meditation on survival, decay, and the relentless passage of time. The relics speak of ordinary lives pressed against extraordinary circumstances, of silent prayers, of work, of fleeting joy and enduring grief. They remind us that history is not only written in grand victories, but in the small, persistent traces left behind, echoing across centuries, carried forward by wind, water, and memory. And so, the river continues its endless journey. Mist drifts once more over the banks, obscuring and revealing, shaping and reshaping the landscape of memory. Life persists in small, unremarkable ways, a heron, a frog, a glinting coin. And in this quiet persistence, the lesson of the river is clear. History endures not only in chronicles or battlefields, but in the intimate traces of existence, in objects that outlast flesh, and in the silent testimony of the past, whispering across time, inviting us to remember, to reflect, and to witness.